My name is Andrew Miller, and 3 months ago, my wife confessed to sleeping with another man. That night, she sat across from me at the dinner table, and with a look I'll never forget, she shattered my world. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice trembling. It wasn't just a mistake, Andrew. It's been going on for months. For months. Those words echoed in my mind like a drumbeat, drowning out everything else she said. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. I guess I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, but I ignored them. Her secretive behavior, the nights spent working late, the way she seemed distant even when we were in the same room. But nothing prepares you for the moment it all comes crashing down. It all started weeks before, in ways so subtle I almost missed them. Sarah, my wife of 7 years and mother of our 5-year-old son Ethan, had been acting differently. She'd always been warm and present, ready with a smile or a touch. But lately, she felt elsewhere. Her phone was glued to her hand more often than not, and I'd catch her smiling at the screen, a secretive kind of smile that I used to think was mine alone. I didn't want to pry. I trusted Sarah. But one night, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, I couldn't hold back anymore. Is there something going on? I asked her. Her reaction was subtle, a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by calm. What do you mean? I don't know. You've been distant lately. You're on your phone all the time. You just feel far away. She smiled, the kind of smile you give when you want to reassure someone without actually giving them an answer. It's just work, she said lightly. Big campaign coming up. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But that gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I tried to shake it off, but the tension between us only grew. She started coming home later and brushing off my questions with vague excuses. Meanwhile, Ethan was asking why Mommy didn't read him bedtime stories anymore, and I had no good answer. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. Sarah had gone out to run errands, but when I called to ask her to pick up something for dinner, her phone went straight to voicemail. Hours later, when she finally came home, her cheeks were flushed and she wouldn't look me in the eye. Where were you? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Out. I told you. I had errands. What errands? Her shoulders stiffened, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw something in her face I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Maybe? Fear? Andrew, don't start, she said, brushing past me to put her bags away. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing in my heart that something was terribly wrong. But nothing could have prepared me for the truth that came spilling out a few days later at the dinner table. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart stopped. What is it? She looked down at her plate, her hands trembling. I've been seeing someone. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. What? I whispered, the air sucked out of my lungs. It started months ago, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to happen, but, there was always a but, wasn't there? It didn't matter what came next. She had betrayed me, betrayed us, betrayed the life we had built together. And that was the moment everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my wife, came crashing down around me. After Sarah's confession, the days blurred into a mess of anger, grief, and disbelief. I felt like a ghost in my own home, floating through the motions of life without truly being there. Ethan was the only anchor I had left. I'd get up every morning, force a smile for him, make his breakfast, and take him to school. But inside, I was unraveling. Sarah, for her part, seemed caught between guilt and defiance. She said she was sorry. So many times I lost count, but each apology felt hollow. I didn't mean for this to happen, she'd repeat, as if those words would stitch my heart back together. I didn't know how to respond. I'd lash out 1 minute, shouting about how she'd destroyed everything, then collapse into silence the next, too tired to fight. And all the while, Ethan was there, watching us with wide, confused eyes. You're still my family, Andrew, Sarah said one night. She was sitting on the edge of our bed, her side, the side she hadn't touched in weeks. I made a mistake, but I want to fix this. I laughed, bitter and sharp. A mistake? Sarah, a mistake is burning dinner. This was a choice. Over and over again. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine regret. But I couldn't let myself believe it. Not anymore. The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell. I tried to stay strong, for Ethan if nothing else, but the betrayal consumed me. I started drinking more than I should, first a beer after Ethan went to bed, then 2, then 3. Before I knew it, I was falling asleep on the couch with an empty whiskey bottle on the floor beside me. The worst part was Sarah's continued presence. She hadn't left, not really. She said she wanted to work things out, to prove she could earn back my trust. But every time I saw her, all I could think about was him, the man she'd chosen over me. One night, after too many drinks, I broke. "Who is he?" I demanded, slamming my glass onto the counter. Sarah froze, her eyes wide. "Andrew, please, don't." "Don't what? Don't want to know the name of the man who wrecked my family? Tell me, Sarah, who the hell is he?" She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she might not answer. But then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, she said, "His name is Jason." Jason. The name meant nothing to me, but it filled me with a rage I couldn't contain. I wanted to find him, to scream at him, to make him feel even an ounce of the pain I was drowning in. But instead, I drank until the anger dulled into numbness. That was the night the idea first took root in my mind, the idea of revenge. If Sarah thought she could waltz back into our lives and pretend everything was fine, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed, but I knew I had to be smart about it. I couldn't let my anger explode in some impulsive outburst. No, I needed to plan, to wait. The next day, I shaved, put on a clean shirt, and dropped Ethan off at school. Then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I went out, not to wallow in self-pity at a bar, but to start my own game. At a local coffee shop, I struck up a conversation with the barista, a pretty woman named Claire who had a quick laugh and an easy smile. She wasn't Sarah. That was the point. It started small, casual chats, a few compliments, a little flirting. Claire had no idea about my situation, and I didn't plan on telling her. This wasn't about finding someone new or moving on. This was about leveling the playing field. Over the next few weeks, I made a habit of going out, meeting new people, and letting myself indulge in ways I never had before. I told myself it was for Sarah, to make her see how it felt to be replaced, to watch her realize she wasn't the center of my world anymore. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a game. The drinking, the late nights, the women whose names I sometimes didn't bother to learn. They were a distraction, sure, but they also gave me something I hadn't felt in months, control. And as the pieces of my new life started falling into place, I began to see the shape of the revenge I wanted. It wasn't enough to hurt Sarah. I wanted to destroy her, to take everything she cared about and make her watch as it crumbled around her. The plan was forming in my mind, slow and deliberate. I would bide my time, play the long game, and when the moment was right, I would strike. Because Sarah might have broken me, but I wasn't going to stay broken. Not forever. The strange thing about spiraling is how easy it is to lose track of where the descent begins. One moment, you're a man shattered by betrayal, and the next, you're juggling two versions of yourself. The devoted father who tucks his son in at night, and the reckless man chasing the kind of chaos he once swore off. I didn't just wake up one day and decide to live a double life. It evolved. During the day, I was still Andrew Miller, the reliable dad who showed up for Ethan's soccer games and helped him with his spelling words. But once the sun set, I transformed. I wasn't Andrew anymore, not the version Sarah knew, at least. It started innocently enough. After dropping Ethan off with my mom one weekend, I drove into the city. I didn't have a plan, just a need to escape the suffocating familiarity of my life. A dimly lit bar caught my eye, the kind of place where nobody asks questions, and I walked in, shedding my old self like a second skin. There, I met Jenna. She was loud, unapologetic, and everything Sarah wasn't. We talked, laughed, and drank until my vision blurred. By the time we stumbled out onto the sidewalk, the idea of being good seemed laughable. I told myself it didn't mean anything, and maybe it didn't. But something shifted that night. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control, even if the control was a lie. The nights out became a habit. I found myself looking forward to them in a way that scared me. By day, I kept my mask firmly in place, picking Ethan up from school, making dinner, feigning normalcy for his sake. But when the house was quiet and Sarah retreated to the guest room, I'd slip away. It wasn't always about women, though they were a part of it. Sometimes it was the rush of ordering another round of drinks when I knew I shouldn't, or the thrill of swapping stories with strangers who didn't know or care about my baggage. Claire, the barista, was different. She was kind in a way that didn't feel forced, and she had this ability to make me laugh when I didn't think it was possible. At first, I felt guilty for flirting with her, but that guilt quickly faded, replaced by a grim sense of satisfaction. Sarah noticed the change in me. She didn't say anything outright, at least, not at first. But her eyes followed me more closely, her questions became sharper. "Where were you last night?" she asked one evening, as I walked in smelling like cheap whiskey and a stranger's perfume. "Out," I replied, my tone daring her to press further. "With who? Does it matter?" Her face twisted into something I didn't recognize, part pain, part anger. "This isn't you, Andrew. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but it's not helping." I smirked, the bitterness bubbling to the surface. "And what would you know about who I am, Sarah? You didn't seem too concerned about that when you were sneaking around with Jason." Her shoulders sagged under the weight of my words, but I didn't care. She deserved it. Meanwhile, my plan was taking shape. I started digging into Jason's life, piecing together the details like I was solving one of the puzzles Ethan loved so much. It wasn't hard. People are careless, especially when they think no one's watching. I found out he was married, a fact that made me laugh out loud when I first saw it. The irony was almost too perfect. His wife, Amanda, was a schoolteacher, sweet and oblivious. The idea of her discovering the truth made my revenge feel even sweeter. I also learned about Sarah's secret. Jason wasn't just a fling. She'd invested in him, emotionally, physically, financially. She'd siphoned money from our joint account to fund their escapades, hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts. It was all there, plain as day. Armed with this knowledge, I began planting seeds. I made a point of mentioning Jason's wife in casual conversation with Sarah, watching her squirm as she tried to hide her guilt. "Do you think Amanda knows?" I'd ask, my tone dripping with faux innocence. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. Claire became a regular fixture in my life. She wasn't a pawn in my game, not exactly, but she served her purpose. Every time I spent the night at her place, I imagined Sarah sitting at home, waiting for me, wondering where I was. The power shift was intoxicating. But even as I reveled in my newfound freedom, a part of me knew it couldn't last. I was walking a tightrope, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And when it did, I wanted to make sure I wasn't the only one left in the wreckage. This wasn't about moving on. This was about setting the stage for the finale. A moment so devastating, so unforgettable, that Sarah would regret ever thinking she could betray me and walk away unscathed. For now, though, I played my role. The devoted father by day, the vengeful ghost by night. And as the pieces of my plan fell into place, I felt the kind of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. Sarah thought she'd hurt me. She had no idea what was coming. The thing about revenge is that it needs to be precise. It's not enough to lash out in anger. That only leaves you vulnerable. No, it has to be calculated, cold, and methodical. That's the lesson I learned in the weeks following Sarah's confession. By the time I had all the pieces in place, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving in the chaos. My nights with Claire, the relentless digging into Jason's life, and the growing distance between Sarah and me. It was all part of the plan. But now, it was time to escalate. I started with Amanda, Jason's wife. She was kind, warm, everything Sarah used to be. I reached out to her one Saturday afternoon under the guise of a concerned acquaintance. I created a fake email account and attached screenshots of the evidence I'd collected. Receipts, texts, even pictures of Jason and Sarah together. The email was short and direct. "Amanda, you don't know me, but I think you deserve to know the truth. Jason has been seeing my wife, Sarah, for months. Attached are the details. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but you deserve better. A friend. I hit send and stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I wasn't sure how Amanda would react, but I knew one thing. Jason's life was about to get a lot more complicated. At home, Sarah was starting to unravel. She noticed the shift in my demeanor, how I no longer cared about where she went or what she did. My indifference was driving her mad. One evening, as I was heading out, she stopped me at the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Out," I said, not bothering to look at her. "With Claire again?" Her words stopped me in my tracks. I turned to face her, raising an eyebrow. "Is that jealousy, Sarah? Funny how that works." She crossed her arms, her face flushed with anger. "You're being reckless, Andrew. This isn't you." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "And you would know, right? You, who spent months sneaking around with Jason while I stayed home, clueless." She flinched, but I didn't let up. "The difference, Sarah, is that I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. You're a liar, a cheater, and soon, everyone's going to know." Her eyes widened, fear creeping into her expression. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked out the door, leaving her to stew in her own guilt. The next phase of my plan involved Jason directly. After sending Amanda the evidence, I made sure to leave breadcrumbs that would lead her straight to Sarah. A social media post here, an anonymous tip there. It wasn't long before Amanda figured out who her husband's mistress was. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. One evening, Sarah stormed into the house, her face pale and furious. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded, slamming the door behind her. I leaned back on the couch, sipping a beer. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb, Andrew. Amanda showed up at my office today. She knows everything." I shrugged, feigning innocence. "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before screwing her husband." Sarah's hands balled into fists, her entire body trembling. "You're trying to ruin me." "No, Sarah," I said, my voice calm. "You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure you don't get away with it." Amanda wasn't the only one I'd contacted. Jason's employer received an anonymous tip about his inappropriate relationships, complete with a copy of the receipts Sarah had used their joint account to pay for. It turned out Jason's company had a strict policy against such behavior. He was promptly suspended, pending an investigation. The fallout was glorious. Amanda filed for divorce. Jason moved out of their house, and Sarah's carefully curated facade began to crumble. But I wasn't done yet. For the final act, I turned my attention to Sarah's reputation. She'd always prided herself on being the perfect wife and mother, the one who had it all together. But now, people were starting to see the cracks. I invited our closest friends over for a casual dinner. Sarah was wary but didn't suspect anything. She was too focused on damage control with Amanda and Jason. Halfway through the evening, as everyone laughed and shared stories, I stood up and tapped my glass. "Can I have everyone's attention for a moment?" Sarah's smile froze, her eyes narrowing. "Andrew, what are you doing?" I ignored her, addressing the group. "I just wanted to share something I've been keeping quiet about. You all know how much I love my wife, but it turns out she hasn't felt the same." The room fell silent. Sarah's face turned ashen. "She's been having an affair," I continued, my voice steady, "with a man named Jason. And while she was out with him, I was here, raising our son, cleaning up the mess she left behind." The shock and pity in our friends' faces were exactly what I'd hoped for. Sarah tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. When the night ended, she was left standing alone in the wreckage of her life, the life she tried so hard to protect. And I felt nothing but satisfaction. The stage was set, and the final act was still to come. If revenge is a dish best served cold, then I was serving Sarah an endless banquet. But as satisfying as it was to watch her world crumble, I began to feel something I hadn't anticipated, a creeping emptiness. It wasn't guilt, not yet. It was more like the nagging sense that the fire fueling me was starting to dim, leaving behind a hollow, charred space. After the dinner party revelation, Sarah didn't speak to me for days. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes puffy from crying, and her usual confidence replaced by a fragile silence. She was still there physically, but emotionally, she was gone. It should have made me feel triumphant. Instead, it felt like I was living with a stranger. Meanwhile, Jason's life continued to implode. Amanda had thrown him out, and the company's investigation ended with his termination. He was, as far as I could tell, living in a cheap motel, trying to piece together what was left of his life. I imagined him staring at the cracked ceiling tiles, wondering where it all went wrong. One night, I was sitting on the couch with a glass of whiskey when Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked frail, like she'd aged 10 years in a month. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I gestured to the chair across from me, my face unreadable. She sat down, wringing her hands. "I know I've hurt you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say this." I didn't interrupt, though my chest tightened with the weight of her words. "I was selfish," she continued, tears brimming in her eyes. "I wanted something new, something exciting, and I thought Jason could give me that. But he didn't. He was never what I wanted." I stared at her, my face hard as stone. "And what did you want, Sarah? To blow up our family? To leave Ethan wondering why his mother doesn't read him bedtime stories anymore?" Her tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. "I don't know. I was lost, Andrew. But I'm not anymore. I know what matters now. It's you and Ethan. I want to fix this." The words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. I wanted to scoff, to throw her plea back in her face. But something about her brokenness made it hard to muster the same bitterness. This wasn't the confident woman who had cheated and lied. This was someone unraveling before my eyes. I took a long sip of my whiskey before answering. "You want to fix this? It's a little late for that, don't you think?" "I know it is," she said, her voice cracking. "But I'm still here, Andrew. I haven't left. Doesn't that mean something?" It was a question I didn't have an answer to. The next day, I found myself replaying our conversation in my mind. Her words stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. I told myself I wasn't softening, that this was just a moment of weakness. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Claire texted me that afternoon, asking if I wanted to come over. Normally, I would have jumped at the chance, but for some reason, I hesitated. Instead of replying, I went for a drive. The city blurred past me as I thought about everything. The pain, the betrayal, the revenge. I thought about Ethan, who didn't understand why mommy and daddy didn't laugh together anymore. And I thought about Sarah, who had become a shadow of herself. When I finally stopped the car, I realized I'd driven to a park where we used to take Ethan on Sundays. The playground was empty, the swings swaying gently in the breeze. I sat on a bench, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of the mess I'd made of my life. That night, I didn't go out. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a bottle of whiskey but not touching it. Sarah walked in, surprised to see me home. "Didn't feel like going out," I said before she could ask. She nodded, hesitating before sitting down across from me. For a long time, we sat in silence, the weight of everything unspoken pressing down on us. Finally, I broke the silence. "What do you want, Sarah? Really?" Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the woman I used to know. "I want my family back," she said. "I want to fix what I broke. But I know I can't do that unless you let me." Her words were raw, honest. For the first time, they didn't feel rehearsed. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fight back. But forgiveness wasn't something I could give her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "Too much has happened, Sarah. You broke something in me, in us, and I don't know if it can be fixed." Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded. "I understand. I needed you to know how sorry I am." As she stood to leave, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The plan had been to destroy her, to leave her in ruins the way she'd left me. But now, I wasn't sure if that was what I wanted anymore. For the first time, I wondered if revenge was really worth the cost. The days following Sarah's apology were a storm of conflicted emotions. My anger hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, no longer burning as hot. Instead, it smoldered, mixing with doubt and something else I couldn't quite name. For weeks, I'd been consumed by my need for revenge, and now, standing in the wreckage of Sarah's life, I wasn't sure if I had gained anything from it, or if I had simply lost more of myself. Jason wasn't doing much better. Word had spread through our social circles about his affair, and Amanda wasn't shy about telling people what he'd done. Jason had become a pariah, dodging judgmental stares and whispers wherever he went. Sarah avoided mentioning him, but I caught her scrolling through her phone late at night, her face pale and drawn. "Do you still talk to him?" I asked her one night, startling her. "No," she said quickly, locking her phone. "I don't want anything to do with him." I nodded, pretending her answer didn't matter. But it did. Claire had noticed the change in me too. I hadn't been to see her in over a week, and my replies to her texts were short and evasive. One night, as I sat in my car outside her apartment, I stared at my phone, debating whether to go inside. Instead, I texted her, "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." Her response came minutes later, a simple, "I figured. Take care of yourself, Andrew." I sat there for a long time, staring at her window, feeling a strange mixture of relief and regret. The next morning, I dropped Ethan off at school and decided to pay Jason a visit. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see him, to face the man who had played a role in shattering my life. He was staying at a rundown motel on the edge of town. When he opened the door, he looked worse than I expected. Unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, a beer can dangling from one hand. "What do you want?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "To talk," I said. He hesitated, then stepped aside, letting me in. The room reeked of stale alcohol and desperation. We sat across from each other, the tension between us thick. "So, talk," he said, his tone flat. "You ruined my family," I said, cutting straight to the point. He scoffed, running a hand through his messy hair. "You think I don't know that? Look around, man. I'm not exactly thriving here. That's supposed to make me feel better?" Jason sighed, slumping back in his chair. "Look, I screwed up. I know that. But it wasn't just me. Sarah made her choices too." Hearing her name from his mouth sent a jolt of anger through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Why her? Out of all the women, why did it have to be my wife? He stared at me for a long moment, then shrugged. "I don't know. She was lost, I guess. And so was I. It wasn't about you, Andrew. It never was." I laughed bitterly. "That's supposed to make it better?" "No," he said quietly, "but it's the truth." I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're pathetic, Jason." "I know," he said, his voice barely audible. As I walked out, I felt an odd sense of closure. Jason wasn't the monster I'd built him up to be. He was just a man who had made terrible choices, like Sarah, like me. At home, I found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of tea. When she saw me, she straightened, her expression wary. "Where were you?" she asked. "With Jason," I said, sitting down across from her. Her eyes widened. "Why?" "I needed to see him, to understand." And I took a deep breath, running my hand through my hair. "And he's just as broken as you are." "As I am." She blinked, her lips parting slightly as if to say something, but no words came out. "I don't know where we go from here, Sarah," I admitted. "But I'm tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of hating you. It's killing me." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Andrew, but if there's even a small chance that we can rebuild, I'll do whatever it takes." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about what rebuilding would even look like. Trust was gone, replaced by scars that wouldn't heal easily. But Sarah was still here. She hadn't left, even as I burned her world to the ground. Maybe that meant something. Or maybe it didn't. I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time, I felt like I didn't need them. Tomorrow was another day. And for now, that was enough. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter, as if the weight of the past few months had loosened its grip. I wasn't healed, not even close, but I was ready to take the first steps toward figuring out what came next. Sarah and I had agreed to talk after we dropped Ethan at school. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, the steam rising between us like a fragile barrier. I need to be honest with you, I said, breaking the silence. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Sarah, but for Ethan's sake, I'm willing to try something. Counseling, maybe. We owe it to him to at least figure out if there's anything left worth saving. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I'll do whatever it takes, Andrew. I swear. Her voice sounded earnest, but there was something in her expression that didn't sit right with me, a flicker of hesitation or fear. At first, I chalked it up to nerves, but as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. That evening, as I was cleaning up the dinner dishes, Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter. She was putting Ethan to bed, so I glanced at the screen out of habit. It was a notification from her email. The subject line caught my eye. Final payment confirmation, Jason W. A chill ran down my spine. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't stop myself. I tapped the screen, and her inbox opened. The email confirmed a wire transfer, $10,000, to Jason. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her emails. The pieces fell into place like a sickening puzzle. Jason wasn't just a fling. He was part of a plan, and that plan wasn't over. I waited until she came downstairs, her hair tousled and a tired smile on her face. Ethan's asleep, she said, heading for the couch. Sit, I said, my tone cold. She froze, her eyes narrowing. What's wrong? I held up her phone. Care to explain this? Her face went pale. Andrew, I can explain. Explain what? That you're still sending money to Jason? After everything? My voice rose, the anger I thought I'd buried roaring back to life. It's not what you think, she stammered. I owed him. You owed him? For what, Sarah? Wrecking our marriage? Destroying our family? Her lips trembled as she struggled to find the words. It was for keeping quiet. The room spun. Keeping quiet about what? She hesitated, her silence louder than any confession. What are you hiding, Sarah? I demanded. Her eyes filled with tears as she finally broke. Jason wasn't just a mistake. He was blackmailing me. He threatened to tell you everything unless I paid him. And I didn't want to lose you, Andrew. You thought paying him off would fix this? I cut her off, my voice shaking with rage. Her tears spilled over, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I was trying to protect you, she whispered. Protect me? I laughed bitterly. You've done nothing but lie to me, Sarah. You've destroyed everything, and now you expect me to believe this? That he was blackmailing you? It's the truth, she cried. I swear, Andrew. Please, you have to believe me. But I didn't believe her. Not anymore. The next day, I paid Jason one final visit. This time, I wasn't looking for closure. I wanted answers. When he opened the door, he looked worse than before. Gaunt, unshaven, and reeking of desperation. What do you want now? He grumbled, barely able to meet my eyes. Sarah says you've been blackmailing her, I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Jason blinked, then laughed. A harsh, broken sound. Blackmail? Is that what she told you? I stared him down, waiting for him to continue. She's lying, he said, sinking into a chair. I never asked her for money. She offered it. Said it was for damages or some crap like that. Guess she felt guilty for dragging me into her mess. Why would she do that? Jason shrugged, his voice flat. Who knows? Maybe she's just trying to cover her tracks. Wouldn't be the first time. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me, her face anxious. Where were you? She asked. With Jason, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. Andrew, please. Don't, I said sharply. Don't lie to me again, Sarah. I know the truth. Her mouth opened, then closed, her face crumpling as she realized there was nothing left to say. You've spent months lying, manipulating, trying to control the fallout of your own mess, I said, my voice cold. And I'm done. We're done. Her sobs echoed through the house as I walked out the door, my heart heavy but resolute. That night, As I sat in my car outside Ethan's school, waiting for morning to come, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: freedom. Sarah had shattered me, but I wasn't broken anymore. I was done fighting for a life that didn't exist. It was time to start over, without her. Tomorrow, I would call my lawyer and begin the process of moving on. For Ethan's sake, for my own sake. Because sometimes, the only way to win is to let go.